Tonight on All In.
You do not represent our movement. You do not represent our country. And if you broke the law, you can't say that.
New evidence about Trump and January 7th.
Do you know why he crossed that language out of the statement?
I don't know.
Tonight, committee member Elaine Luria on the former president's refusal to condemn the rioters at the Capitol, plus how Mike Pence's right-hand man just testified to a grand jury, how Merrick Garland is feeling the pressure, and how the Republican Party is fully embracing its worst impulses. But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Today, the January 6th committee released brand new video showing just how reluctant Donald Trump was to condemn the violent insurrection he incited. Now, you'll remember, of course, that it took Trump hours to publicly denounce the violence and tell the mob to go home. 3+ hours. When he finally did so, he released this truly deranged video message from the Rose Garden.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Now, obviously, that was very far from a condemnation of the violent insurrection, which left multiple people dead. It was a lot more like a coach giving his team a pep talk after losing a tough game. So Trump's advisors realized that that wasn't enough, that this, we love you, remember this day, go home, bucko. That's not going to work. So they got to work on drafting a new speech for him to deliver the next day. Try to kind of like wipe the slate clean, like, okay, here's the real condemnation this time. And last week, the January 6th committee released what essentially amounts to a blooper reel of that speech, the next day speech, the written speech on the teleprompter, where we saw Trump, even after his coup failed, refuse to say, pointedly, the election was over.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. And to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement. You do not represent our country. And if you broke the law, you can't say that. I'm not going to. I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defied the seat of justice. It's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
But Congress is certified. Now Congress is
Yeah,
certified.
right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay? I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. Yesterday is a hard word for me.
Just take it out. The heinous attack.
Ah, good. Take the word yesterday, because it doesn't work with the heinous attack on our country. Say on our country. Want to say that?
No, keep it.
My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote.
So it was a big moment when the committee played that video last week. Well, today, committee member Congresswoman Elaine Luria of Virginia released a new video, and this was full of previously unseen testimony, you haven't seen it before in any of the hearings, from some of Trump's closest advisors on just how hard Trump resisted saying anything negative about the rioters.
I'm not sure when those conversations began because they could have started early the next morning, but I believe they started that evening, on the evening of the 6th.
I thought we should give the statement on the 7th and obviously move forward on transition.
I sat with her, I spoke to Miller about trying to put together some draft remarks for Jan 7 that we were going to present to the president to try to say. We felt like it was important to further call for de-escalation.
From what I understood at the time, and from what the reports were coming in, there's a large concern of the 25th Amendment potentially being invoked, and there were concerns about what would happen in the Senate if the 25th was invoked. So the primary reason that I had heard, other than, we did not do enough on the 6th, we need to get a stronger message out there and condemn this, otherwise this will be your legacy. The secondary reason to that was, think about what might happen in the final 15 days of your presidency if we don't do this. There's already talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. You need this as cover.
Do you recognize what this is?
It looks like a copy of a draft of the remarks for that day.
Okay. And as you can see throughout the document, there are lines crossed out. There's some words added in. Do you recognize the handwriting?
It looks like my father's handwriting.
In my view, he needed to express very clearly that the people who committed violent acts, went into the Capitol, did what they did, should be prosecuted and should be arrested.
It looks like here that he crossed out that he was directing the Department of Justice to ensure all lawbreakers are prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We must send a clear message, not with mercy, but with justice. Legal consequences must be swift and firm. Do you know why he wanted that crossed out?
I don't know.
And that needed to be stated forcefully. They did not represent him or his political views in any form or fashion.
He also has crossed out, I want to be very clear, you do not represent me. You do not represent our movement. Do you know why he crossed that language out of the statement?
I don't know.
Can you describe a little more for me about what Mr. Kushner was asking you to do?
I don't remember if it was a video message or a speech he was going to give or something, but I know people were deciding like what he should say or what he should do. And then he knew, since I'm always with him, that, hey, if he asks your opinion, try to nudge this along. This will help everything cool down. So that's what I did.
Nudge it along in what way? What does that mean?
To make sure he delivers this speech or whatever it was. I don't know if it was a video or a speech or something. It was either, right. It was within a few days after January 6th.
Was the implication that the president was in some ways reluctant to give that speech?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you base that on?
The fact that somebody has to tell me to nudge it along.
So by all accounts, from some of the people closest to Donald Trump, essentially the guy that served that last guy as kind of his body man with him all the time, he didn't want to say anything at all on the day after the insurrection. Now, of course, we knew that the ex-president's response in the wake of the 6th was negligent, irresponsible, dangerous. But the committee has shown it was even worse than many imagined at the time, right? And while the next January 6th hearing is until September, we may see new information like this latest video trickle out from members of the committee. Just today, for example, committee member Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois told my colleague Andrea Mitchell the committee is open to subpoenaing the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, Ginny Thomas, for her role in plotting Trump's attempted coup.
Ginny Thomas started out as kind of uninterest. We had a few pieces of evidence that we had seen, and then it just grew, particularly with some of the Eastman memos and those conversations reaching out to state electors. We want to have a voluntary conversation. Just come on in. She said, I think somewhere in the media, that she was eager to talk to the committee. That's it. Come in, let's talk. If we need a subpoena, we will, but we prefer, obviously, to just find out what she knows.
Now, today we also got some huge news just in the last few hours, because we learned that Mike Pence's former chief of staff, Mark Short, testify before a grand jury in the Department of Justice's separate probe into the insurrection last Friday. Short is perhaps the highest profile Trump White House official to testify so far, at least as far as we're aware. The grand jury also reportedly heard from Pence's top legal advisor, a man by the name of Greg Jacob, who you may recognize for previously testifying before the January 6th committee. He had a big sort of showdown with Eastman about Pence's ability to unilaterally change the election. Their testimony signals the Attorney General's investigation, Department of Justice investigation, which has been quietly unfolding in the background, has further expanded its scope from the actual insurrection itself and the people that were in the building to the plotting of the coup attempt. Democratic Congresswoman Elaine Luria of Virginia sits on the January 6th committee and joins me now. Congresswoman, let me just start on that news. Obviously, I know that these are completely parallel tracks and you guys have no special vision into whatever the Department of Justice is into. But given the fact that your investigation has made public the role of Greg Jacob in resisting the Eastman legal theory, which would have essentially upended American democracy, are you encouraged by the fact that Short and Jacob, high-ranking officials, have now given sworn testimony before a grand jury through the Department of Justice?
Well, I start out, like you said, as the committee, the select committee in Congress, we have no direct knowledge or involvement in investigations that are being carried out by the Department of Justice. But this goes much closer to the top than what we've previously seen with, defendants who were accused of trespassing and violence and then seditious conspiracy. I look at it like consent circles. The Department of Justice, it feels like, started from the outside and working their way in. Well, just how far have they worked their way in? We don't know, but this is certainly an indicator they're ratcheting up the level of their investigation, and that's encouraging from an outside perspective. Of course, the committee continues on our separate track as a congressional committee.
To that separate track, this new testimony today, we hadn't seen this before. It was sort of a new method of delivering testimony from the committee. I thought it was quite interesting, particularly the sort of corroborating testimony of people around the ex-president about his reluctance to give that January 7th address. How did this come about? Why did you release it this way?
Well, there's so much more that we've heard from witnesses, so much more of the story to tell. And over the course of 8 hearings, probably about 18 to 20 hours that we've had an opportunity to present information to the public, we just are not everything into that. So this was really additional information that explained that speech on January 7th, the one where we showed the president, he really couldn't bring himself to say the words, the election is over. But this gave additional detail about, what went into the speech. It's really enlightening to me, the parts that he crossed out. And we wanted to make sure to share that information because it provides amplifying details on what we shared in the hearing.
I want to also ask about the Ginny Thomas question, because there's been some news circulating on that and some various committee members giving their thoughts. I want to show what the vice chair of the committee, Liz Cheney, had to say about Ginny Thomas yesterday. Take a listen.
The committee is engaged with her counsel. We certainly hope that she will agree to come in voluntarily, but the committee is fully prepared to contemplate a subpoena if she does not. I hope it doesn't get to that. I hope she will come in voluntarily. We've certainly spoken with numbers of people who are similarly situated in terms of the discussions that she was having that you've mentioned. So it's very important for us to speak with her. And as I said, I hope she will agree to do so voluntarily, but I'm sure we will contemplate a subpoena if she won't.
Congresswoman, do you share that desire to hear from Ginny Thomas, given what we know about her involvement in all this?
I do. And just like Liz Cheney said, she initially made an indication that she was going to come forward and talk to the committee. If necessary to go to that step, we will issue a subpoena.
Hey, Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought we lost you for a moment there, Congresswoman. I guess finally the question is, where are things right now? I think there was a sense that you were going to kind of wrap things up, that you had had a very successful investigation. You talked to all these people. You had gotten all these documents. There really wasn't a ton who had sort of evaded the grasp of the committee, Steve Bannon being a notable exception. Of course, he's now facing sentencing for that evasion. But it also seems that a bunch of new things really have been uncovered, even in the last 4 to 6 weeks. How would you characterize where the investigation stands now?
Well, I would say that at the outset, we came up with this framework by which we were going to lay out the facts. And as you saw, we did the 8 hearings, added an extra one in there when breaking information came that we thought was urgent to get out to the public. And we started the so many more people have been coming forward. We've received so much more information, just volumes and volumes of information, and even more leads that we need to follow. So what I'll say with that is, the investigation itself is continuing to accelerate. In fact, at the same time, the is really also focusing on our work of producing a report and the recommendations, which are this committee to prevent something like this in the future.
All right, Congress.
Just so much more information coming in. All
right, Congresswoman Elaine Luria, thank you so much for making some time for us tonight. I appreciate it. All eyes are on the Department of Justice, and now Merrick Garland is apparently feeling the pressure to pick up the pace. The reporter who broke that story joins me next. One of the ongoing investigations into Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election is happening right now in Fulton County, Georgia. We know that letters were sent out to Georgia Republicans last week letting them know they could be indicted for their role in the fake elector scheme. We know that Rudy Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer, has been ordered to testify in front of that Fulton County special grand jury next month. We also know that Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp was scheduled to testify today before that same grand jury. We are now learning that Georgia investigation, along with the efforts of the January 6th committee, are putting pressure on the Department of Justice. Joining me now is a New York Times reporter who's been reporting on this, Michael Schmidt. Michael, your piece was illuminating for a lot of reasons, and one of them most was that when I saw the Georgia Fulton County DA was investigating the fake electors, I thought, well, we know the feds are looking into that too. That's the first place where we see some sort of Venn diagram overlap. What does that mean inside the Justice Department?
Well, I think the question and issue that has arisen out of the hearings is that why is it that the congressional committee seems so far ahead and the prosecutor in Atlanta seems so far ahead? And it looks like some of that has to do with sort of the methodical nature of the Justice Department. The Justice Department, as someone once said to me, was sort of like a tank. It takes a long time for them to move their gaze, but once they get on a target, they go ahead in an effort to essentially destroy it or to get to the bottom of it. And there has been a lot of frustration, I think, or misunderstanding about the Justice Department from, folks on Capitol Hill, from average Americans who are watching these hearings and saying, well, what is being done about this? Why is it that we are hearing from this committee first about it? What has gone on? And Garland had to address this last week. He addressed it publicly, basically saying, that the gears of justice are the gears of justice that move slowly and they move secretly and they're not done in public view, and we're not going to be out there publicly discussing this. The public had sort of been familiar with these investigations that have looked at high-profile people. The FBI confirmed that it was investigating Hillary Clinton back in 2015. The FBI director went before Congress in 2017 to lay out to the public that they were investigating this. But we're trying to explain to the public why it is that there may not have been a lot of action that has been seen on this compared to the other investigations.
So you write about these sort of two lines of inquiry that we can glean from the publicly available information we have, right? They're not making statements, but there are subpoenas and search warrants and things like that. You say through subpoenas and search warrants, the department has made clear it is pursuing at least 2 related lines of inquiry that could lead to Mr. Trump. One centers on those so-called fake electors. The other line of Justice Department inquiry centers on the effort by Trump-era Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark to pressure Georgia officials not to certify the state election results. Now today we get this news, which strikes me as enormous news, that Mark Short and Greg Jacob, two individuals who have testified to the committee and two very high-ranking, I mean, the highest-ranking, people in Pence world, essentially, went before a federal grand jury on Friday. How significant is that, do you think?
I think it's very significant because it starts to answer the question, what is the Justice Department doing?
Right.
And the Justice Department is investigating what went on in the lead up to January 6th so extensively that they want to talk to the two people who were directly advising the vice president. And we're not just helping counsel him, but we're witness to the instances in which John Eastman and Donald Trump were trying to pressure Mike Pence to take the certification into their own hands. And they were witnesses to that. They saw that. They know what was going on. They can provide detailed insider firsthand accounts of how Pence was responding as Trump and Eastman were giving them this bogus legal gobbledygook about how he could take the certification and either send it back to the states or, pick Trump as the next president. And that is a significant move forward because it shows that the department's investigation has moved into the tier of people who were directly around Trump in this key period of time.
Yeah, I mean, that really leapt out to me, right? You got those folks going to talk to a grand jury. They're not doing it for their health. That's not a early in the investigation kind of thing. You're bringing them there because you want to get something out of it. You also note this about Fani Willis, who's the Fulton County DA, and I thought the sort of notion of the interplay here, obviously there's no official interplay, but just what it means the Department of Justice and others, this investigation's happening. She is sent this target letter to those fake electors, including a state senator named Burt Jones, the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor in Georgia, that he could face indictment. On Monday, a judge in the Superior Court barred her from pursuing a case against Mr. Jones because she had headlined a June fundraiser for his Democratic rival in the race. Mr. Jones was one of 16 pro-Trump alternate electors in Georgia. I thought that's interesting just because, obviously, Fani Willis is a more easier political target, I would imagine, for people that want to defend Trump than perhaps the Department of Justice might be as these investigations go forward.
Look, being a local prosecutor is just a different thing than being a U.S. attorney or, working out of the Justice Department in Washington. And, at times, a lot of local prosecutors are elected and, where folks at the Justice Department are appointed or they're career prosecutors. And so it's just there are different sort of issues that local prosecutors have to come into because they are more receptive to their local community. And a judge down in Atlanta had criticized her for doing so many interviews on television about this investigation. There are less restrictions on a local prosecutor about how much they can talk and go on about this stuff. And it just sets up a different thing. And it just shows their investigation looks like it's really moving ahead because they're also, there's a lot of news that it's kicking up.
All right, Michael Schmidt, New York Times, thank you very much. Coming up, the Republican race to the bottom as potential 2024 candidates spend the weekend trying to out-Trump each other. That's next. When you talk about the absolute superstars of the conservative movement right now, the fact that Ted Cruz is one of them, well, eesh. But that is how the podcaster from Texas was introduced at the big Turning Point USA Festival of Dad Jeans awesomeness this weekend. Amid all the pyrotechnics and loud music, of course, Donald Trump's influence could be felt nearly everywhere at this conservative conference, despite a lot of recent talk about the ex-president starting to lose his grip on the Republican Party. You've probably seen some of these headlines, and I have to say, I do think there's some truth to that. Back in 2016, the thing that made Donald Trump truly unique in the Republican Party was that he was just an enormous jerk all the time. No one else was doing that. The base ate it up.
So I'm looking at little Marco and I say, man, there's something happening with him. and he's like melting. How about Cruz? Is it Lion Ted? You're right, Lion Ted. He's a liar.
I see Rick Perry the other day, and he's so, he's doing very poorly in the polls. He put glasses on so people will think he's smart. And it just doesn't work.
And I'm watching these guys like Jeb, low energy Jeb Bush. So low energy. Oh. You fall asleep looking at him.
Now, politicians generally, in the time that I've covered politics, not all of them, but most, have just tried not to be jerks, right? The goal was to get as many people to vote for you as possible, people to find you likable and electable. And so at first, I think people in professional Republican politics could not get their hands around the idea that this could be a successful method. But it worked for Donald Trump, obviously. And now it's basically become like the core rule of the movement. Luxuriate in being a jerk and being antisocial, flagrantly so, being a troll. Troll conservatism is conservatism, more or less. And that was on full display at Turning Point USA's preposterous light show.
I talked to a student recently at one of our woke college campuses who said she's required in every class to introduce herself and to give her pronouns. Well, I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
Have you watched these pro-abortion, pro-murder rallies? The people are just disgusting. Like, why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb.
Now, it's worth noting the congressman there talking about women's looks is under investigation by the Justice Department, the FBI, we believe, reportedly, for allegedly paying for sex with a minor. Now, perhaps the one Republican who's found success by moving a little bit away from the Trump method, or at least doing it with a certain defter touch, is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And look, his policies are terrible. He's done really dangerous stuff as the governor of Florida. But he also says things that a savvier politician might say. Rather than calling women who support abortion rights ugly, he stirs up, caters to resentment with a somewhat lighter, more insidious touch.
I will have math books sent to my Department of Education for review, these textbooks, and they will do things like woke math. And I'm thinking to myself, 2 + 2 = 4. It's not 2 + 2, well, let's have a struggle session over that. How do you feel about it? No, no, no. There's a right answer here, and it's not about injecting ideology into concepts like math. So what we did at the Department of Education was we sent the books back. These textbook companies had no other choice but to take the woke out and send us back normal math books. And so we're winning.
Of course, the question is whether the base now wants what Ron DeSantis is offering or what Donald Trump is. Civil rights lawyer Sherrilyn Ifill summed up very well this sort of desire that you see on display with Matt Gaetz and others, that what Donald Trump offered was the freedom to be your worst self. And it turns out many Americans have been waiting for that opportunity. I've been thinking about that formulation. Although many in the party are now copying him, Trump is the founder of that particular style of conservative politics, at least in this era. But lately, the ex-president seems to be so caught up in his own grievances, he's lost a bit of his ability to successfully pander to his supporters' grievances. And we saw the result of that at the Turning Point USA conference, the Trump applause line that wasn't right after this. The cracks in Donald Trump's iron grip over the Republican Party were visible this weekend when this line, clearly intended to rile up the crowd at the conservative Turning Point USA conference, was instead met with crickets.
A friend of mine recently said that I was the most persecuted person in the history of our country. Me, the most persecuted. I never thought it that way. I never had time. I was always fighting with these people that were trying to persecute me. I didn't have time to think about being persecuted because I was fighting persecution.
Just no reaction whatsoever from the crowd to the ex-president's whining there. So has Donald Trump's grievance politics become too self-absorbed for his base? Tim Miller is a former RNC spokesman, author of Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican road to hell, and he joins me now. I thought that moment encapsulated a lot. And you've seen it borne out in some of Sarah Longwell's focus groups, some of the polling as well. Like, it's one thing if it's your grievances he's into. It's another, it's just his own grievances. And there does seem a little bit of a distinction there.
Yeah, and this was always something that is like this battle within Donald Trump himself. This isn't the first time that he got a little wrapped around the axle on his own complaints and whininess out on the trail. He always was good at reading the crowd. A lot of times for ill, honestly. He recognized that the crowd liked some of his most deplorable shticks and then continued to promote them. That's one of the reasons we got the Muslim ban, for example. So look, the Longwell focus groups and these are data points. It's showing that it's possible that he's losing the excitement level with the crowd, but we've all been here before. The question is, can he rein it back in once he gets back on the trail?
Well, and I also, what do you think about this idea, like the sort of license to be your worst self, the kind of thrill or liberty of it? I mean, Hannah Arendt writes about this on totalitarianism, about that being a sort of key aspect of the authoritarian appeal. As someone who sort of saw this up close, what do you think?
Yeah, that was a triggering segment earlier of the 2016 insults that I had to live through. But I do think it's real, and I think that it's having a long-term impact on the culture. Look, I have a Snapchat show called Not My Party for Teens, and what I try to do is like be an antidote to this, because a lot of the content that they are getting now, teens on the right, is just this trolling, the cruelty, the meanness, and whatever you thought about the college Republicans of yesteryear, we weren't perfect. There is this massive cultural shift that I think is happening now within the party. You're seeing it in how the politicians are acting. That's what you talked about. But also on the staff level, the kinds of treatment of the media, the kinds of treatment of enemies that you're seeing, the sort of trolling, the types of people that want a job working for Republican politicians. It's self-selecting. Yes. And I really think that there's even if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, this pernicious element of his attitude isn't going away.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that there's a few things, right? I think, it's self-selecting, right? It's attracting people who are like that, who relish in being this way to Republican politics, for staff jobs or speechwriting jobs or comp jobs. But usually there's a kind of check on this, right? Which is, again, the reason that there were shock jocks when we were growing up who were different than U.S. senators was that they had different sets of incentives. Like, senators have to get elected. Shock jocks just have to get people to listen to them. And because of the kind of polarization, because of the sort of, it's a +8, +9 state like Ohio, J.D. Vance thinks I could run as a shock jock. Blake Masters in Arizona. Like, this idea that you can, that binding constraint doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and we could do a whole symposium on this, but also as part of it is that people don't feel like they're getting anything from Washington and their response to this, right? Another thing that we learned from these focus groups is senators are different from governors. Right? Like, people think their governors are being responsive to them. I listen to these Republican focus groups who do the Bulwark, and the people are like, I really think Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are the ones that are doing their job because they're fighting. I see them on TV, right? And they don't believe or even care that whether people in Washington can actually deliver results for them. So I think that disconnect between what we're seeing in local politics in Washington is really evident.
Yeah, and that distinction between how governors are doing and how senators are doing, if you look at Mike DeWine in Ohio, right, the way that he's trying to be a Republican politician versus J.D. Vance, it's really quite different. I wonder how much the Mike DeWine model can hang on when the rising tide is clearly the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Matt Gaetz's.
Pretty skeptical of that, Chris. Just look at Maryland. Larry Hogan, the most popular governor in America, just his handpicked successor, a moderate and a Republican, gets beaten by an absolutely insane QAnon person in a primary. The Republicans just give away the governorship of Maryland, because this is a bottom-up thing. It's what the TPUSA crowd wants. It's what the primary voters want. Yeah.
Never underestimate demand. The demand side pushes.
Exactly.
When you look at something and you say, this seems bad, lots of demand for it. Tim Miller, thank you very much.
See you, Chris.
Still ahead, why the top pro-Israel lobbying group is just pouring money into Democratic primary races, including one to defeat a Jewish member of Congress. What's going on in Michigan? Next. Next week, voters will turn out for the Michigan primaries, among other states. And on the Democratic side, it will feature one of the most watched races of the cycle. Because of redistricting, two incumbents, Andy Levin and Haley Stevens, are facing off against each other, which happens from time to time. They got districted into the same district. Now, what's fascinating here is that Levin is from arguably one of the best well-known Democratic families in all of Michigan. His uncle was the late six-term Senator Carl Levin. His father, former Congressman Sander Levin. Sander Levin represented part of the Detroit metro area for more than 3 decades. Now, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as AIPAC, is spending an enormous amount of money through a sort of soft money super PAC against Levin, who also happens to be one of only 27 Jewish members in the House. AIPAC has spent more than $3 million supporting Congressman Levin's opponent in a race where the two candidates combined have raised just over $7 million. So this is a huge, huge, huge thumb on the scale in that race. Last night, Levin spoke to my colleague, Mehdi Hassan, about why a top Israel lobby group is going after him.
You are Jewish. Why is a pro-Israel lobby group using a super PAC and dark money to try and defeat you in a Democratic primary?
I'm not just Jewish, Mehdi. I'm one of 2 former synagogue presidents in the Congress, along with Senator Jackie Rosen. I've got I've got mezuzot on all my doors. I'm really Jewish. But AIPAC can't stand the idea that I am the clearest, strongest Jewish voice in Congress, standing for a simple proposition that there's no way to have a secure democratic homeland for the Jewish people unless we achieve the political and human rights of the Palestinian people.
This all that ad money seems to be paying off. New poll has Congressman Levin, again, an incumbent, well-known, down in the polls by 27 points with just over a week until the election. Peter Beiner is the editor-at-large for Jewish Currents, where he writes, quote, what AIPAC and its allies have recognized is not just the power of immense campaign spending, but the power of immense campaign spending in open Democratic congressional primaries. And he joins me now. Peter, what's going on here?
I think what happened is that in 2019, a group of members of Congress, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, came in who represented a shift in Democratic public opinion. The polling is very clear. Younger Democrats are much more sympathetic to Palestinian rights than older Democrats, and the Democratic Party in Congress is out of touch with where actual Democrats now are on the issue. And so AIPAC saw a danger that actually the Democrats in Congress might start to represent what most Democrats out there in the country believe, which is that the U.S. should not give unconditional military aid to Israel, irrespective of what it does, even if it demolishes people's homes and detains Palestinian children. And so AIPAC decided only a massive infusion of money into Democratic primaries would keep the Democrats in Congress not being receptive to the public opinion of actual Democrats in the country.
So I just want to be clear, it's not just this race, right? So Andy Levin and Haley Stevens, it's been a bunch of races, most recently Donna Edwards, who was running in Maryland. And here you've got this, the United Democracy Project, which I guess is the sort of super PAC entity. I mean, the amount of money they're spending, like $4.26 million opposing Donna Edwards. There was 3.7 of all other outside spending in that primary. So this isn't just playing in races. They come in and they are, in many of the races, the single biggest source of ad money and ad spending in that race. And it has a pretty big effect, it looks like.
A massive effect. I mean, I think in the Maryland race, both Donna Edwards and her opponent directly spent less than $1 million. AIPAC spent almost $6 million. So, that has a big impact in a House race. And it's not just AIPAC. What you're seeing in some of these races is that when AIPAC goes after a progressive candidate because they have some sympathy for Palestinian human rights, then you tend to see other groups that also don't like progressives, not because of Israel-Palestine, but because they think they might be too tough on the fossil fuel industry or the healthcare industry, and they pour in their money as well. And so what you have is essentially the creation of a whole new generation of Joe Manchins and Kirsten Sinemas in the Democratic caucus.
Now, obviously this is the way that politics works now, post-Citizens United. There's unlimited spending from super PACs, and the Constitution, as read by the conservative court, is that this is part of the First Amendment. What's also striking to me here, there's a New York Times piece on this, which I thought was pretty good, but the headline was Democratic primaries are embroiled in debate over support for Israel. I thought that sort of misstated things, because the thing that's so bizarre here is at least in the races that I've covered, Jessica Ramos' race and Henry Cuellar down in Texas, the vast majority of the spending hasn't been anything about Israel or Palestine or anything. It's not like they're coming in and saying, look, Andy Levin is critical of Israel. Haley Stevens is a more stalwart ally. Vote for Haley Stevens. They generally don't even mention Israel.
Right. They don't actually want to have a debate about Israel-Palestine, partly because it's not what most people are voting on, but also because the public opinion is very clear that AIPAC's view, which is that essentially no matter what Israel does, the U.S. will give it a blank check, is a very unpopular view among Democrats. So what they do is they find some generic poll-tested issue, and then they just basically buy up all the advertising to try to destroy the person on that issue. But it's fundamentally because they don't want an open debate about Israel-Palestine, because they know that actually AIPAC is not where most Democrats in the country are on that issue.
Yeah, I misspoke. It's Jessica Cisneros, not Ramos, down in the Rio Grande Valley, who lost that very closely contested primary. What do you think? I mean, where's the money coming from? Is the other question, right? So, I mean, you've got huge. I mean, there's a huge checks being written. Some of it gets disclosed later on, but my sense is that, ironically enough, in these races where they'll run ads saying so-and-so is not a real Democrat, right? The super PAC will run an ad. Like, the money is coming often from people that themselves are not Democrats.
Yes, some of the biggest donors, people who've written million-dollar checks, are Republicans. And in fact, they lead Republican institutions. The head of the Manhattan Institute, which is a very prominent kind of right-leaning think tank, which basically supports a very conservative agenda, gave AIPAC Super PAC $1 million, for instance. And so, right, I mean, AIPAC does not care whether Democrats or Republicans win. They simply want people who will support Israel unconditionally to win. But those people, by and large, are also less likely to take a progressive stance on other issues, because if you don't basically believe in the idea of equality under the law for Palestinians, you're less likely to actually believe it in the United States either.
All right, Peter Beinart, who's got a piece about this in Jewish Currents, and this continues to be the case. We'll watch that Andy Levin, Haley Stevens primary and others where this will likely play out as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That is all in on this Monday night. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.